Do you ever wonder if you're a narcissist? Or if sometimes maybe you just show narcissistic traits? Now, if you were abused or neglected as a child, you probably had to be self-focused in a way that other kids did not. And as an adult affected by past trauma, you might still struggle at times to handle criticism or be able to support other people when they need the attention on them. And that's actually normal, and luckily it can be healed. So how do you know if these traits that are sometimes associated with having complex PTSD veer off into actually being narcissism? Here's a video where I lay out narcissistic traits common in people with CPTSD, especially when they've just started healing. Complex PTSD and narcissism are closely intertwined. They're not the same thing, but in families, narcissism in a parent can cause complex PTSD in the child. The parent might be emotionally absent or controlling or completely self-centered and have no ability to see or recognize the child's unique and good little self. And you hear all the time about how people struggle with the effects of that, a narcissistic parent, how they become wounded and vulnerable and self-attacking. But what's interesting, and what's never talked about, I think, is how often the parent's narcissistic traits or behaviors are absorbed by the child, to the point that people in the child's adult life might very much feel that they are being wounded by narcissistic behaviors. Now, it's often said that if you have the self-reflection to ask yourself, am I a narcissist? Then you're probably not a narcissist. I'm not sure if that's totally true, because you could just say those words, right? But if you're honest with yourself, you'd have to admit that of course you have some narcissistic behaviors. Everyone does. We all do. We have some tendencies, especially when CPTSD is triggered. And I bring this up because these narcissistic tendencies are pretty much the elephant in the living room around why people with CPTSD struggle with relationships. And none of the abuse was your fault. You did not ask for this to happen to you. But it's worth asking yourself if you're maybe sometimes driving people away with the very same narcissistic tendencies that hurt you in the first place. They're just tendencies. It's very unlikely that you actually have the personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. Personality disorders are really hard to change. But the wounds of childhood PTSD that lead to these tendencies, they can be changed. It's not an overnight job, but they can be changed. This is flexible, and I can tell you how. But first, let's talk about some of the behaviors that show up in traumatized people. Not every symptom of CPTSD looks like narcissism, but let's talk about the ones that do. So first, people with CPTSD have a tendency to focus on how we feel all the time. It becomes very dominant in our consciousness to a degree that it can make it difficult to be sensitive to other people. Have you ever had that? When you're in a lot of emotional pain, it can be very easy to overlook what's going on in your companion's day, what's going on in their life. And I had a period in my life where 3 close family members died in less than a year. Also, I got attacked on the street during that time, and I got dumped, and some other bad things happened. And I was drowning in sorrow. I was drowning in overwhelm, and my PTSD symptoms were just taking over my brain. I was barely able to read or have a conversation. I'd be on the phone talking, and I couldn't even remember who I was talking to sometimes. I was really struggling. And I got the feedback from a friend at that time, that I was being very self-centered. And it made me mad at the time because I couldn't really do better than that at the time. I was very self-centered. I was in deep shock and woundedness. But for the record, it was helpful to know that for other people, it wasn't like having a two-way friendship, right? So if we get stuck in our trauma and we can't have a two-way friendship, that's one reason why we could end up feeling kind of isolated from people, because very few people want to sign up for that, for a relationship where we do all the talking, where we are the designated person who needs to be cared for today. Most people want something a little more mutual, or certainly in a healthy relationship they do. Okay, second thing, we can get very focused on how other people think about us. And these are subtle signs, right? And everybody tends to focus on what other people think about them. But what I noticed about CPTSD in myself and as I teach other people, I teach this technique, like the foundation of what I teach to help people heal their symptoms has to do with writing down fearful and resentful thoughts about other people. And those thoughts, sometimes I'm attacking myself, but a lot of times I have fear what other people think about me. I have fear they think that I'm stupid, old, fat, no good, not lovable. They're not including me. And especially early in my healing process, I was really burdened with these ideas. And in effect, it's like I'm sort of thinking about myself, but it's all about like, what do other people think of me? Why haven't they started treating me nicer yet? Why do they keep triggering me? Why can't they change their behavior so life would be easier for me? And in a way, that is a focus on how other people think of us. And I bring that up because it's one of the hallmarks of a narcissist, is that they are very focused on other people and whether other people make things good for them, at the expense of thinking about what do other people need and what's the reciprocal arrangement there. So this is sort of a subset of the first point I made. Okay, third point. When we're symptomatic with CPTSD, we have a belief that our problems are so unique that no one can possibly understand. I hear this all the time when I coach people. They go, well, I have problems you couldn't possibly understand. Now, here's the thing about me. I have problems. They're not as bad as some people's. They're worse than other people's. The stuff that I went through in the past was pretty bad, and I don't talk about 90% of it because part of my healing program is, if you take my courses, you'll get some highlights of the bad stuff that happened. But for me to talk about it all the time would really be a bummer for you. It'd be a bummer for me. It would focus on the problem. You know the problem. You have the problem. I focus on talking about the solution. So when people come to me and think that I know somehow what PTSD is like, and I know somehow how to calm the symptoms, but I couldn't possibly understand the problem, that's not always true. Of course, some people have had experiences that I have not had, for better and worse. In the case of certain abusive situations, yes, I'm very grateful I didn't go through what some people went through. But I've had people say stuff like, well, I have to move. I have to move and I'm sick right now and have to go to the doctor. You couldn't possibly understand. It's like, oh my gosh, you think I don't know what it's like? I've had 14 surgeries and was in and out of the hospital. See, it's like a competition. It's not a competition. So when I get into trying to convince somebody I do understand, that's also like a game I don't want to play. And that's why I just want to call out that thing where you go, my problems are so unique, nobody could understand. Now, I agree, when you have CPTSD, a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand the nature of it, and they cannot understand why we don't just fix our problems. It's like, why do you keep getting together with the same kind of jerk? Why do you keep overreacting? Why don't you just not overreact? It's so simple for them, right? But we understand each other. More or less, we understand. And I'm calling it out as a narcissistic tendency to just think that your problems are so much worse than anybody else's. I know objectively that there are many, many people who have worse problems and who actually handled them okay. And I will just point out to you that every individual is different. You can put like X amount of trauma on this person and this person. One of them will develop complex PTSD and one person will sail right through it. You do it to a third person and they end up their whole life just collapses and they can't deal with it at all. We're all different. And so there's no point in making comparisons about your troubles and your grief and your solutions. What helps is when you're talking to other people is to look for commonality, look for what you can learn from other people's experience. And what a relief it is when you meet somebody who has been through something similar and who does understand. I went through high school thinking I was the only kid who lived in a chaotic home, and I tried not to tell anybody. A few of my close friends had been to my house and they kind of saw the outward signs of it. And I went to a high school, like a 30-something year high school reunion. Because when I left the town where I went to high school, I graduated a year early and I left and I never came back. I had a lot of shame, was part of the reason I never came back, but I finally went back. I was healed enough and I went back and I connected with people, and I was really surprised how much I liked my former friends and how much we felt connected to each other. And when we really got to talking, we found out that all of us in my group of girls that I was tight friends with in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, all of us had a parent who had an addiction or alcoholism or had died. So we all had been dealing with kind of a major loss of a parent. and a lot of the craziness of addiction and alcoholism at home. And none of us were talking about it at the time. And then we got together and we talked about it, and it explained so much. So it is good to be with people who understand. It's also good to be comfortable with people who don't have your experience. They may never understand your wounds, but you can learn so much from people who were less traumatized. So keep an open mind. It's a narcissistic tendency to just think my problems are special. You know, people have to conform to my problems or they don't count. That is a narcissistic thought. And we don't want to go there. We want to heal from those tendencies. All right, the next narcissistic tendency that you sometimes see in CPTSD is a strong victim identity. And this comes up in narcissistic personality disorder. For us, you know, there really was some victimization. And for the record, a lot of people who have narcissistic personality disorder were very traumatized as kids. It may have played a role. It's not the only cause, but it can play a role in why people end up with that personality disorder. So that doesn't mean that it excuses the behavior in them or in us. So the strong victim identity, you were abused, you were neglected, or you wouldn't be on this channel. So you were a victim, but I'm going to encourage you not to let it be your identity. All discomfort and shame that you feel is no longer caused by other people or the past. That's kind of my radical statement here. If you're still having discomfort and shame around other people, what's going on is some present time fear and resentment about that, and that is coming from here. And before you get all offended that I think that I'm saying like, oh, it's all your fault, you create your reality, I'm never saying that. You were abused and neglected. It caused problems. You're having trouble moving on from being completely held down by the problems that causes. Most people will be held down for life. We're here, I'm trying to teach you how to not be held down for life, how to get free. And I'm not saying you deny that you were victimized in the past, but I want you to get in touch with your new identity, which is that you're no longer a victim, or you're learning not to be one, right? Because, I mean, a lot of us continue to get victimized because that pattern was laid down in us. But we can learn. We have a brain and we're adults and we're free. And with a little bit of persistence and learning, we can begin to change that pattern. And then we're not a victim. Another victim format that you'll see in CPTSD people and narcissists is I'm the long-suffering victim. I'm so nice all the time, but everyone on the planet is just awful, and they're mean to me for no reason. And I'm kind of making fun of that, because if you think that you're the only nice person on the planet, you actually might have narcissistic personality disorder. None of us is the only nice person on the planet. We're like everybody. We have a mix of good and bad traits. And like everybody else, we do better when we work on healing the bad traits and the vulnerabilities, and we play off the strengths. We got to love ourselves as we are. But we're not the only good person in the world, and there are many good people out there. And just like there's people who suffer more than we do, there's people who do good things on a scale that any one of us can only like guess at, like we don't even know. And honestly, if we've spent a lot of our lives kind of held down by trauma, we didn't have a chance to shine. We didn't have a chance to bring our gifts to bear. And that is why it's so important now to heal, because if your gifts, which are in there, you were given gifts, if trauma came in and stopped you from fulfilling those, from becoming your real self and bringing to the world all the good that you have in you, if that got thwarted by trauma, that's terrible. That is the tragedy. That is, I think, that the deepest, most burning source of depression and sort of discouragement is just knowing that you're capable of so much more, but you can't do it. You get so tripped up on things. So you're here, you're watching this video now. And together, that's what we do. We learn to not get tripped up over those things. We learn to sail through them. We learn to handle them so that we continue to be ourselves, so that we can be real and honest about who we are. The next narcissistic trait. People with CPTSD, I speak for all of us, we can be arrogant sometimes. We think we know how other people should live or how they should think or what they need to change about themselves. And that, in effect, is putting ourselves above them, thinking that we know more than they do. That is the very definition of arrogance, and it's very often misguided and cruel. It pushes people away, to say the least, when we do that. And so you want to check that. It's a very natural thing, and especially if you grew up with trauma, your life may be heavily populated by people with serious problems. When we think we know what somebody else ought to do, and we start saying, you know, honey, I've been through this before, here's what you do, you got to read this book, you got to eat this, you got to not drink that, we're putting ourselves above other people. And sometimes they might want that help. They might be turning to somebody who has that experience. But if they're not, what it feels like is control and arrogance. And it causes them to want to push us away. At its very worst, that kind of control can go to the extreme of being, you know, misguided pressure, and it can be cruel. It comes off as criticism. So if you feel like you're just trying to be helpful to people and you're finding that they're not receptive, that's something you could ask yourself is, do I do that? Am I giving them advice in a way that makes them feel a little bit criticized or a little bit, you know, like I'm trying to control them? And it can come as a surprise how little you need to do that to influence other people. The best thing you can do if you want to influence other people is to just do really well yourself, to solve your own problems and to show up happy and free in front of them. And then they might ask you one day, how did you do that? But I'll tell you, you know, of all the healing I've ever had, people have rarely spontaneously asked me for advice or changed their life because I sort of rushed in with a solution for them. More what happened was I sort of, you know, used my solution and changed my life, and people began to ask. And I suppose when you come find me on YouTube, that's a form of asking. You can watch the video or you can turn it off, but I'm not pushing you to do anything I say. In fact, I tell people all the time, when I give advice about how to deal with this thing called CPTSD, put it on the front porch of how you listen to things. Don't bring it right into your house. Just listen to what it is. See if you agree with it. See if you think you can use it. And don't take it with a grain of salt, because it's my experience. And the best thing you can do is use your experience. Another narcissistic tendency that we sometimes have in CPTSD is we have a hard time seeing our own role in our problems. Not just in that we, you know, think that we're innocent victims and blame other people, but also we have trouble realizing that we have agency. We do have the capacity to discover what's going on in our lives and to change it. It's not easy, and some things are very difficult to change, but we have agency. So that tendency to think, oh, you know, everybody else just controls everything and they make everything bad for me and I can't do anything, that is like a narcissistic tendency. So when we think that other people control things and we can't, what we're basically doing is we're taking our standard allotment of power, which is about like everybody else's. Everybody has some power over themselves. We're taking that and we're giving it to somebody else. And in fact, when we give it to people who abused us and say, well, I was abused, so I can never change, we're taking that power and we're giving it to these people who hurt us in the first place. And further, we sometimes tend to believe that they did it because they targeted us. And that is occasionally what somebody does. A very bad person might target another person for abuse. Most abuse happens by people who are overwhelmed and too messed up inside their own head. Maybe they're narcissists, maybe they have CPTSD, but they're getting overwhelmed and this bad behavior is coming out. So it's not always a product of targeting. And I think believing that all abuse was targeted at you is a form of giving your power away, because it's a way of not seeing that even though you had CPTSD and even though you might not have been able to see it coming, given the information and the strength that you had at the time, you couldn't have done anything about it. You can learn from it and maybe handle such a situation differently next time. I think that people over-assign targeting as the cause of somebody's abuse. Targeting is something that you don't have much control over, do you? You have less control. Whatever you do, however you interpret what happened to you, try to see if, given what you know now about CPTSD and about yourself and other people, is there a way that you could protect yourself from that happening again without having to cut everybody out of your life, without having to make everybody on the planet bad? To try to keep your heart open. Your heart is going to play a big role in you becoming your real self. So you shutting your heart down, you cutting people off, it's not a good solution to the problem of CPTSD. It's a temporary solution. It's a temporary solution and it saved you, and that's great. But now we're going to help you open your heart again. There's a similarity here in that a person feels too fragile to hear criticism. And I think in the case of narcissism, a person cannot be messed with in this belief that they're perfect and above everything. A person with CPTSD is fragile just worrying that they're worthy enough to deserve to be part of the human race, right? There's a real low self-esteem there. Criticism takes on a power that it really doesn't have. It takes on a power in the ears of a person with CPTSD to be very destructive, and that mirrors a narcissistic tendency. And it's not a good one to have. We need a coping mechanism to deal with criticism sometimes so that it doesn't get in, so that we can keep it on the front porch of our listening and not let it into the house. And consider, is it good criticism? Is it something we need to hear and can learn from? Or is it just junk that somebody's throwing at us? That's the case sometimes. Another narcissistic tendency, we are drawn to troubled people who are less functional than we are sometimes, and who see us as bigger, better, smarter, more successful, the leader, or even the savior. People who have narcissism want to be surrounded by people who look up to them. I've noticed that people with CPTSD tend to sort of split it and have difficulty with equal relationships sometimes. So there's always one person is up or down. I've certainly noticed that before I was healing, that my relationships were all either I was kind of the person who had more power or the other person was. And either I was getting resented or I was doing the resenting. So unequal relationships have a place in the world, and that would be normal with a parent and a child, or an employer and a worker. You know, somebody's in charge there. So there's a place for that. But of course, for our closest relationships, we want to have the capacity for equal relationships. Part of healing is to develop comfort to have that. And equal relationships have a whole lot of level of communication that can be tricky with CPTSD. And I think that's why there's an attraction to unequal relationships, because you don't even have that you don't really have to work out certain fine, nuanced problems. It's just like, well, the boss says, you know, this is how we're going to solve this problem. So it's a way of skipping over the part that's complicated. As you heal, that's going to get easier for you. So that's something you might want to look at in your life. Another narcissistic tendency, we sometimes make big sweeping accusations at people. We say stuff like, you know, education is just brainwashing for the masses, or religion is all about social control. These things are not true. Those are resentful, big sweeping statements. Another one you hear all the time is, everyone I know is a narcissist, but of course I'm not. I'm exempt from this. And that sort of sweeping declaration is a narcissistic tendency. If you pay attention to reality, of course not everyone is a narcissist. And I see this particularly in YouTube comments, people who just say, it's a terrible world out there, nobody cares about other people anymore. And we know when we read those comments, they're talking about their experience, they're having a terrible experience, and it feels like it's everybody. But that's what happens with CPTSD, is that kind of thinking can calcify, and ultimately that's a very self-centered and narcissistic style thought. You know, I'm the only good person, everybody out there is bad. It puts us above everybody, and, you know, of course nobody likes it. It pushes people away. And usually it's said by people who have already resigned themselves to that by declaring, everybody's bad, I'm gonna isolate myself, it's the only way. And I think some people's PTSD is so bad that is for now the best solution there is. But I'm here for anybody who's ready to take that next step and try to reconnect with people, you know, to help look at the behaviors that get in the way, including these narcissist style behaviors that you may have inherited. Now here's one. I don't think this is as common as some of the other ones, but it's a narcissistic tendency. And it's a sense of entitlement, where we believe that other people are sort of like the grown-ups and they're responsible to make our lives better or make the world better and even pay for everything like housing, food, therapy. And this reflects an unhealthy belief that we have a special status as people who are just damaged and have to be taken care of, but who don't have any obligation to other people. And so we very easily see the obligation of some people towards people like ourselves. We don't see our obligation right back. And I totally understand, and I've been the person who could not fulfill certain obligations because what was happening in my life was too great. But there have been other times when I had the joy of sort of stepping up a little bit and becoming one of those people And I really want to put it out there that whether you can do it in a big way or a small way, when you rise up to start bringing that goodness that you're holding latent in you under the CPTSD, when you start to bring it into the world, you're going to feel a joy, you're going to feel a freedom, you're going to feel a power that you never could have had when you were waiting for other people to solve your problems for you. We all need help sometimes, but in every little way that you can, see what you can do to become that person, even if it's in a tiny way, helping somebody who lives on your street, all right? There has never been a time when thinking clearly and thinking for yourself have been more important than they are right now. But some people shout and punish you for even thinking something that they don't agree with. And I call these people opinion bullies. And if you've experienced abuse and neglect in childhood, you may be especially vulnerable to being controlled by them emotionally and psychologically, and sometimes even physically and financially. With childhood PTSD, it's all too common that we end up losing ourselves around other people, especially people with strong personalities and strong opinions. It's okay that people have strong opinions, but with us, we get around that and we often feel we have to go along with those opinions, or we go silent even when we disagree, or we lose track of what we believe just by being around someone else's beliefs. So some areas where this comes up, as you know, are in families, in dating relationships and marriages, with coworkers, with classmates, your neighbors, even strangers on social media, well, especially strangers on social media. Everywhere you go, people are going to have different points of view, but what we're seeing in the place of friendship and curiosity is a steep rise in the prevalence of opinion bullies. And let's define that as people with an extreme belief that their opinion is the only right one. And frankly, it's a narcissistic sense of entitlement to not just tell you about their opinion, but to demand that you agree. It's a nightmare, right? It's especially a nightmare for people who had childhood trauma. It feels very threatening. A lot of people are confused and hiding out of fear where all this bullying is leading, even people who never had trauma. So for traumatized people, this can be paralyzing. It can totally shut you down, and that's not good. What happens is, with that fuzzy zone around holding your own opinions or your own agenda around people who are being intense and authoritative, you can go deep into a CPTSD survival reaction. You know, just get through this, don't say a word, smile, agree, go along with their bullying behavior. But in that intensified pressure, you may be tempted to go along with their hurtful actions, like slandering other people behind their back and online without the least idea whether this trash talk is even true. And you end up hurting other people and hurting yourself. And it feels horrible, or it ought to. And yet this fear of expressing your own opinion is not some phobia. You're not imagining that there could be real consequences to sticking your neck out and thinking for yourself in this particular moment. So let's acknowledge there is risk and that it takes courage to be yourself and not fall into helplessness around other people's opinion bullying, and what is, in effect, narcissistic attempts to control you and take your power to increase their own power. So I'm going to tell you 5 things you can do to strengthen yourself so that you don't lose yourself when you're under pressure to fit in with opinion bullies. You don't necessarily have to argue with them. You can still keep quiet, but if you're going to do that, it's really important that you're making that choice that's true to yourself and not just erasing yourself like so many of us have done in the past. So this strength to keep being yourself in situations where you don't feel accepted or safe will serve you in 1,000 ways as a person who is healing from past trauma. You're learning not to disappear, not to abandon yourself around people who are louder or angrier or more pushy than you. In fact, it can be dangerous to check out when you're around this kind of person. This is one of the big ways abuse can happen. You surrender, you give up, you attach yourself to people and replace your own perception with whatever they're telling you. Not all bullying is at that level of abuse, but all bullies are a drag. And the skills I'm about to teach you will help you to get through your contact with them without getting enraged or forcing yourself to be silent or changing into some version of yourself that's not really you. Now it took me years of healing to even see how fragile I was around opinion bullies. What made me susceptible to them was, for one, needing them, or thinking I did, and sometimes I needed them for a paycheck, or, have you ever had a boss or coworker like this? I'd get around people like this, and it was like taking a terrible drug that anesthetizes you into paralysis, where I couldn't speak or move. And I just feel terrible inside and terrified to say anything. People have to really matter to you to get you to conform to something that repulses you. Either it's your livelihood, or it's your only social support, or you're under threat of some kind. And there are plenty of times and places where people had to go along or be killed, right? But there's a subtler form where it's implied that you're going to lose your job or you'll get socially destroyed in some way if you speak up. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking right now about all the political drama of recent years, and I'm going to ask you right now, if you comment, please don't name any particular person or idea in particular. We can talk about this issue without taking sides or even showing what side we're on these issues. It's really about, it's about the phenomenon of holding our own in the presence of opinion bullies, and everyone has to learn how to do that. I happen to know the people who come to this channel for support have the full spectrum of beliefs and opinions, which is beautiful and right. And we can get some healing around the social trauma of all this division and find peace with people having differences of opinion. Peace. In fact, this is good practice, and I wish all the opinion bullies out there would hear this. Always assume that people with different beliefs are in the room, and conduct yourself accordingly. People who have a different point of view than you might not feel that they're safe to speak up in your presence. So you might think everybody thinks the same thing, but that's almost never true. And how I learned this was by struggling away in life with this very problem. I didn't like it. I don't like it. I used to get sick with fear and stress around it. But I'll tell you, when it comes to bullies who try to take my power away, I've been hurt before, but just as much I've hurt myself because I got scared and surrendered my power preemptively all by myself. And there was part of me that was too fragile and scared to stand on my own, or to face how they might act if I expressed myself. I didn't have confidence in what I thought either. I feared that I'd be abandoned if I were honest, or if I didn't tightly control everything I said. And I hate that feeling. The more I heal from trauma, the less I can tolerate shutting myself down like a self-hating little chameleon. When you let opinion bullies cause you to shut down inside, notice the morally uncomfortable feeling that's there. It feels gross. It requires that you dumb down. It feels like poison. And I remember doing this all the time. And I've been asking myself, how much have I changed? And how did I do that? And it was kind of a process. It's still a process going on, but progress in not losing myself, not transforming into a fake self around opinion bullies began when my CPTSD healing began. It's not really a coincidence, I know. Healing makes faking stop working. Does that make sense? Healing makes faking stop working. So what can you do? You can strengthen yourself. You can strengthen the boundaries around who you are while still being curious and flexible about what you believe. You can get stronger in this area just like you get stronger physically. You do it by exercising, by practicing. Childhood trauma stopped us from doing that, but now it's time to start again. So here are the 5 things that you can do to build that strength that allows you to keep being yourself and knowing what's true, even in the presence of people who are bullying you with their opinions. All right, 1, you start by telling the truth. Maybe not directly to the people around you. It's not always the time and place, but you do it to a trusted friend who accepts you, and say it to yourself. Say it. Write it down. Start practicing articulating what you know to be true, what you believe to be true. You can sit in the car or in the bathroom, if you have to, and whisper what you know and believe. Make a habit of declaring and recording your true thoughts and feelings. This is part of your healing, to develop your individuality and to know yourself. The second way to resist opinion bullies, and let me explain why it's relevant, is to strengthen your capacity to pay attention. Now, when your childhood trauma is up and your triggers are activated, it's totally normal to be in a brain fog. But people in this state very easily just kind of walk into trouble. We can't see the red flags. We can't feel the vibe that something's not right. And so even if no one is trying to control you, you can get easily entangled with someone whose agenda is stronger than yours. Now, learning to stay present like that is a lifelong process, but it's one you can start this minute. For one thing, you can learn my daily practice. Those are techniques. You can learn them free. It's a free course, and I always put the link down in the description section. It's there, daily practice. It's also on the free tools page of my website, which is also linked. I make it just like I sort of like flood you, like check out this daily practice. And you can learn how to calm your mind and get clearer about who you are, what's real, what is your purpose. The third thing you'll need is to strengthen your ability to connect with other people. When you're disconnected and isolated is when you are most vulnerable and least perceptive about the nature of other people's intentions. So with CPTSD, there's almost always an injury to our ability to connect, to form an authentic two-way connection with other people. And it leaves us lonely, and it leaves us too open to coercion from controlling people. Connected people, on the other hand, can see red flags, and connected people are not afraid to get away from controlling or abusive people. Okay? The fourth thing you'll need is to recover your sense of autonomy and self-determination. Traumatized people don't usually have that at first. When we're in the trauma, it feels like everything just happens to us. And sometimes that's true. We're genuinely helpless. But most of the time, we actually do have agency. We have choices. What's holding us back is usually fear. Fear that we're going to end up alone and that we have to do whatever anyone asks of us so that they'll stay with us. And this fear is paralyzing and is exactly where we can be preyed upon by abusers. So finally, the fifth thing is to practice leading each day with your own agenda. And this means basically having a life and setting your intentions for yourself about the ways you're trying to heal and expand your life. And when you're doing these 5 things, the power of bullies gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's how I realized how much I was controlled, not really by bullies so much as my own idea of what other people wanted. And in effect, I was controlled by me. So it's a big deal as a person with CPTSD to heal and grow to the point that you don't seek out people who can define who you are, which is what control is. You can deprogram yourself from the reality you knew as a kid when other people really were causing your problems and other people really were the only people who could solve them. But now it's you. You're free and you have agency, and developing this doesn't always happen overnight. But you can make progress a little bit each day. There are so many things in life that make it too easy to slide right into a state of resentment. When you have childhood PTSD, there's this feeling of dysregulated irritation, and it can make a person very harsh and critical. And if you don't have a way to release that, you can end up believing that other people are doing it to you, and what comes out of your mouth is blame. You're blaming people in your life. You're hitting them with resentment about it. It's most likely to come out towards the people who love you the most. And somewhere inside, we know that we're doing something wrong when we do that, and then we end up making up stories about why it's necessary to feel that way, why we have to tell these stories, why it's justified. And some people really are abusive, and your anger is necessary to propel you out of that situation and to get a boundary up. But sometimes the pain of things that happened in the past will make you resentful and cruel to people when it's not justified. They don't deserve it. So I have a letter today from someone I'll call Jill, and she writes, I'm divorced, 47 years old, 4-year-old son, not by my ex-husband. I'm the youngest of 3 with a supportive family. My parents split when I was in 1st or 2nd grade, yet I maintained a loving relationship with my dad. Got the fairy pencil. I'll be circling things I want to come back to on a second reading, but let's just read through and see what Jill's saying. My parents didn't hide any arguments from us, just the truth about the downfall of their marriage, and it turned out that Dad cheated multiple times and emotionally abused Mom. I've lived away from home for 10 years and plan to move back home and in with my mother and her husband, not my dad, this summer until I can save money. My mother is the poster child for codependents, low self-esteem, people pleasers, and can use passive-aggressive behaviors at the drop of a hat. My ultimate trigger is her indecisiveness. She can't even place an order at a fast food drive without getting dysregulated. I'm now realizing she may have CPTSD, as she's recently shared childhood and relationship traumas with me. I've seen her being dysregulated for years, yet I never understood what was happening. My mother is remarried to the man that came to live with us after my dad left. His presence made my siblings and me uncomfortable, and my mother would force us to speak to him, saying she only wants us to be polite and respectful. She's big on manners and appearances. She once threatened to take my new school clothes back to the store if I didn't say goodbye to him one night. This dynamic created such pain within our home that my sister left during middle school to live with my dad. I never asked what really happened because no one ever talked about these things. This man would bounce in and out of our home for years, and finally, when I was 26 years old, my mother announced she was marrying him. Why was this happening again? He had nothing to show for his life. No job, car, or a place to live. He was disabled, ex-drug addict living with his mother. I accepted her decision and tried to support her, as no one in the family liked him or approved of this marriage. Fast forward to now, and they're still married, and now he's sick. Dementia, CPOD, and on oxygen. My mother still holds on to this fantasy of us being what I call the Brady Bunch family. I've shared with her that if the Lord Jesus came to earth and told my sister to be friends with her husband, she would not. That's how much hatred is there. My mom and I have always and still do have a special bond, yet I don't want to become her emotional bestie, her handywoman, her maid, chef, therapist, hairdresser, or have a fake friendship with her husband. I know nothing about him, not even his middle name. She also has some jealousy tendencies that have irritated me for years, yet she denies them. If I have a new hairdo or a new dress, I recently lost 70 pounds, she will say comments like, "Ooh, I want that too," or "Can you help me lose weight?" She also has rules for her home and has a bad habit of micromanaging. She also has expressed that she doesn't understand why my siblings and I can't see she needs help around the house. I'm all for pitching in, but her demands, entitled mindset, and behaviors can trigger my own CPTSD symptoms to new heights. I'm a carbon copy of her, minus the indecisiveness and micromanagement. And I don't want to be made guilty for living my life. That is, going out on weekends, talking on the phone after 9 p.m., or not wanting to cook for her husband like we're one big happy family. Mom is so excited for my son and me to come home. Her retirement, the pandemic, her bad knees, and stress from being caretaker to her sick husband have all caused her to be isolated way too long. I want to enjoy my time with her while I'm there. However, I'm just starting my own healing journey, and I've incorporated the daily practice, that's the thing I teach, into my life, and I'm finding awesome results with it. I'm noticing triggers and dysregulation, and I'm using the tools to calm them down. How do I set healthy, age-appropriate boundaries with her, as she is big on children being respectful and honoring to their parents? I don't want a repeat of Christmas a few years back when she passive-aggressively stated that she did so much for us. I stepped in, as I'm grateful for all she does, and told her to go lay down, I'll clean up. She ignored me and continued to help out, micromanage, by telling me how to sweep the floor. Later that evening, I walked into her room with a piece of cake, and instead of her asking right out if I could bring her a piece, she said, "Ooh, I want some cake too." She said it in a childlike voice. I was so triggered I snapped, which made her snap back and shut down. Also, her husband approached my sister and asked if they could be friends. He's in his 70s and is still trying to push a connection because of my mother. Side note, I phoned her on Father's Day. I was in my 30s, and she and hubby picked up at the same time. And before I could say hi, she cuts me off and says, "You didn't say Happy Father's Day, Jill." Well, you could imagine my emotional flashback. Please help me before I lose it. So, a little after thing here. I wrote to Jill. I read this letter and I was very intrigued by it. I literally could not hear what the problem was. And I asked, I said, why is there so much animosity towards your mom's husband? Did he abuse you? Because it seemed to me like that was the missing piece, like there was some reason why everybody was like this. And Jill answered, our hatred towards him is that my sister and I never refer to him as stepfather. It's so silly, yet I won't let it go. He was not abusive toward me in any way. He was verbally argumentative toward my sister from what I saw and heard as a child. The animosity toward him was, 1, he wasn't our dad. We adored our dad because Mom kept the real him to herself. 2, he wasn't good enough. No job, car, home, beneath her standards in our eyes, no education or social graces, etc. 3, Mom was forcing us to have a relationship or friendship with him and guilting us if we didn't. She justifies this even now by saying, I only want you to be respectful and polite. You're so rude and inconsiderate. I hope this helps, says Jill. Yes. Okay. I think I've got an answer for you. I'm going to read through again, Jill, and I'm going to see if I can help you with this. Okay. First of all, thank you for writing. Thanks for getting help with this. I think something must have been nagging you that, I don't know, the reason you can't get clear about this is because you're not seeing it clearly. That's my opinion. And I'm not sure you're going to like what I'm going to have to say. Now, usually I rush in and I defend people. But in this situation, this feels like a narrative you're using. And I'll tell you why. So, all right, you're divorced, you're 47, and you have a 4-year-old kid, not by ex-husband. You're the youngest of 3. Parents split when you were in 1st or 2nd grade. What's that, 6 or 7 years old? Yet you maintained a loving relationship with your dad. That's good. But evidently your mom raised the kids, the 3 kids, mostly on her own. Parents didn't hide any arguments, so there was a lot of fighting, but they never told you until you were an adult that the marriage came apart because your dad was cheating and was emotionally abusive. So I think that's really appropriate that they didn't tell you that. It's not appropriate to tell kids something that they didn't know. And it's also not appropriate for somebody to badmouth the other parent. So it sounds like your naivete about there being a problem was good. That was a favor they did for you. But it's this thing where you didn't accept it. It sounds like maybe you blamed your mom for the divorce. And I think that can happen. So I'm the child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was 7, and I was heartbroken about it, but it was necessary and right. They fought all the time. And then my kids, I got divorced with their dad when they were 1 and 4. They were really young. And I knew the marriage wasn't going to work out, but I probably wouldn't have ended it right then. He did. But it was terrible, and we fought in front of the kids, the same thing. Very bad for kids. I regret it very much, and I'm really, really grateful that we've repaired that relationship and, done our best mutually to marry other people who also love the kids and to create sort of an extended family, a Brady Bunch family, if you will. I've lived away from home for 10 years and plan to move back home. So hold on, I'm just doing the math. You're 47. You lived at home when you were 37. So that's unusual to live at home that long. Or maybe you were home for a spell. But as an adult, moving home is it's unusual. It's a big thing. And you're moving home again at 47 and plan to move back home with your mother and her husband this summer so you can save money. You'll be there with your kid too. That's amazing that they will help you do that. I just want to say, you're so lucky. You want to save money and they will actually let you stay there, especially after all this drama and hardship and bad feeling. My mother's a poster child for codependents, low self-esteem, people pleasers, and can use passive-aggressive behavior at the drop of a hat. Your ultimate trigger, you say, Jill, is her indecisiveness. She can't even place an order at a fast food drive without getting dysregulated. You know what? I used to be like that too. And I've been around other people who were severely abused who couldn't even order off a menu without getting completely flustered. It's a sign of abuse, Jill. It's not like somebody being a bad person. It's a sign of abuse. And so first, I just want to say, when you're in the presence of somebody getting dysregulated, I have videos for that. But one of the things that you can do is be a peaceful presence and not hurry them and not put negative pressure on them or criticism on them. A person who gets dysregulated will only get more dysregulated and into shame if they're pressured at times like that. So now that you have the gift of knowing what CPTSD is and what dysregulation is, you have the opportunity to reflect patience and kindness towards her when she gets like that. Everything you're saying about the codependence, the people pleasing, even the passive aggression, although the examples you gave me of passive aggression, I couldn't see it. But let's just assume you're right. She can't really say things directly when she's not happy. That would bother me too. But I just want to say, it's classic for somebody who grew up abused. And you didn't say what her childhood was, but I'm going to guess there was a bully and or a very unreliable parent there. Maybe an alcoholic, maybe some violence. She was invalidated. She wasn't listened to. When a person wasn't listened to as a kid, you will often see that coming out as passive aggression or indirect communication, what feels very manipulative. And I'm not trying to defend manipulative behavior. I'm just trying to say, your mom, there's literally nothing in your letter that says your mom's a bad person. She sounds like somebody who has some trauma, and she's been through a hard time. And one of the hard times she's had is that her kids are actually quite unkind to her. So that's where I'm headed with this. Try to bear with me. I have sympathy for you because I know you had a disrupted childhood too. But I think I can help you. I think I can help you to open your heart to life and to the world and to other people here, because there's this wall that you've got up. I can see it. It's a very prickly wall, and it's aimed at your mom and her husband by proxy. I'm now realizing she may have CPTSD, as she has recently shared childhood and relationship traumas with me. I've seen her being dysregulated for years, yet I never understood what was happening. Yeah, now we know. We can have compassion for people. My mother is remarried to the man that came to live with us after my dad left. His presence made my siblings and me uncomfortable, and my mother would force us to speak to him, saying she only wants us to be polite and respectful. All right. I think that being polite and respectful to her boyfriend, then husband, is appropriate. The way that you guys hated him so much, that's why I was like, well, what happened? Did he abuse you? And you're like, no, he didn't in any way. He was argumentative with your sister, but it sounds like that's the most troubled relationship. So that he's just gotten like decades of grief from her. And so if he was argumentative, I can understand why. Now, I'm remarried. My husband is a step parent to my kids. And I remember when my kids, they were very upset when they found out I had a boyfriend, and we didn't tell them for a year, after we had been dating, or they sort of vaguely knew, but they didn't meet him for a year until we knew that we were serious about dating. We were considering marriage. It was 2 more years before we got engaged, but, we were very consciously moving towards that. And probably, maybe your mom didn't have that, but her dating relationship was going toward marriage. And after her being in an emotionally abusive relationship with your dad who was unfaithful to her, honestly, I'm glad she had somebody to love her and be her companion. That's a blessing. And the complaints that you have about him, I'll read them later, but I just didn't get it. So you were forced to speak with him, but yes, he lived there. And it is very rude and inconsiderate and hostile not to talk to him. And I can't help but ask, if this had anything to do with your dad. It sounds like you had a kind of messed up psychological dynamic of loyalty to your dad, that you could not give your blessings to your mom moving on and having a new relationship, right? Because who she chooses, if he's an ex-drug addict, awesome. An ex-drug addict is like a miracle in its own right. If he didn't work, that's okay. That's okay. Many people don't work. You might not want that for yourself, but she wanted it for herself, and she's the one who has a home for you to come to. I'm just saying, like, you're the one who's not able to save money. She's doing okay. I think when you go stay in somebody else's home, you do live by their rules. And if one of their rules is, come on, be polite and respectful, of course you be polite and respectful. Of course you do. Now, you could force yourself to do that. But I don't think, if you have to force yourself, I don't think you should go there. I think you should be doing the inner work with the daily practice to get free of all this resentment you have that they've done something to you by being together, by carrying on with life in the best way they could. They were not abusive, and they managed to make a life for themselves. And now he's sick. So this is not a good time for you to come in with drama or anger or anything like that. I'm going to emphasize that strongly. So you say your mom is big on manners and appearances. Okay, well, I don't think she's that into appearances because she's with a guy who doesn't have a job, as you say, and doesn't have fancy things. You're the one who's big on appearances. You're the one who's bothered that he doesn't have this social status. She's big on manners because manners represent kindness. And I think that's completely appropriate. And I just don't think you can ever go wrong by being kind and well-mannered with people. Being kind and polite, it doesn't get in the way of setting boundaries or protecting yourself from abuse or harm in any way. It's just the right way to move through the world. You will never regret interacting with people in a kind manner. That is the best thing. If you can do one thing in this life and you want to contribute positively to the world, be kind. Be kind to people. Be kind especially to the people who are helpless, who are sick, who are not able to work, who have injuries, who are struggling to function. I'm going to guess that your mom's husband also has a traumatic past. It's really common to have an addiction, and it's amazing when somebody gets out of it. I would also speculate that the two of them have some affinity because they've both been through a hard time and they're both making the best of it. And I think it's pretty amazing that, given the circumstances, that they're letting in one of the children who has never accepted him. I'll just say that if one of my kids were rude or hostile to my husband, I would never let them stay here. My husband is, I've made a commitment, a vow to him. And I stand by him. I have his back. And the same thing with my kids, but I also wouldn't tolerate my husband being terrible to my kids. I wouldn't have married him if he were terrible to my kids. He's kind and polite to my kids. He's generous with them. It's an interesting dynamic, being a step parent. As much as you don't want to call him that, you were a child when he came along, and so he is that to you. It's not the same as your dad. You're not being disloyal. It's just that you have a child generational role as your mother's child, and he's her husband. And so he has that dynamic with you, and it calls for that sort of respectful behavior. He's married to her. It's his house. It's his house. I think it's great that they help you, and I don't think there's anything wrong with needing help, financial help, but I just think that that it's absolutely necessary to be kind and respectful to the people you're asking to help you. I think it's just flat out. And if you've got this going on towards them, I am going to wager that this is bleeding into the rest of your life, that you're having difficult relationships with men and women and other people, and it's going to be hard. And because you have a kid, I'm just going to implore you, model for your child what it's like to be loving towards others. This is not where anybody's at risk of abuse. It's your beef with him. Well, let's read about what you said about him. Okay, so she's big on manners. She once threatened to take your new school clothes back to the store if you didn't say goodbye to him one night. Oh, Jill, I would have done that too. Not saying goodbye is petulant and childlike. And it sounds like you were a child. They were school clothes. But that's how you teach children to have some manners. It sounds like your mom wasn't very effective at holding the boundary on good behavior, because the bad childlike resentment at him not being your dad has continued for decades. That would be typical of a codependent person, to just feel like she has to keep being nice to you even though you keep being mean to her. I'm just going to tell you again, I think you need to give her a break. That was very reasonable to just say, look, you don't get to have all these privileges if you can't give the basic decency of courtesy to the man who lives here and is my husband. Okay. So then you say it was so much pain that your sister left during middle school to live with your dad. Okay. In middle school is painful, and kids very often go live with one parent and then the other. And that's hard, but that's normal. Okay. Nobody's the bad guy in something like that. Divorce is the bad guy. Your mom couldn't see it coming. Your dad is the one who made something bad in the marriage. Maybe there was never the ingredients of a good marriage there. I'm not judging them. It happens to half of all marriages. And if you're here on Crappy Childhood Fairy, how many of us have parents who are still together, who stayed together till one of them died? Practically nobody, sweetheart. It's part of it, It's part of coming from a hard family. It's part of it. So he went to live with your dad. I never asked what really happened because no one ever talked about these things. And this man would bounce in and out of your home for years, and finally when you were 26, she announced she was marrying him. So it sounds like for 20 years they dated, and you say bounce in and out of the home, but for a single woman, it's okay. It's actually, I could see when you were a child, if he was moving in and moving out and moving in and moving out. Maybe you're not telling me about emotional pain for your mom and stuff, but if that was the case, if she was just all messed up over him all the time and they were breaking up, yeah, that's a lot of drama. And I'm really sorry you went through that. But it still is not a good reason to live your life resentful. When you were 26, she said she was marrying him. And you show a little mad, sad face there. Why was this happening again? Because she loved him and she wanted to be married to him, and she's an adult and she gets to do that. He had nothing to show for his life. Well, he did. This part hurts my heart, Jill. To say that someone has nothing to show for his life because he doesn't have a job, car, place to live, disabled, ex-drug addict, living with his mother. He's a human being. He has everything to show for his life. You're talking about
status and material things. And that might, you're like at an age where you have a child and you might be looking for a husband and you want to look for somebody who makes money and who can, support you in a middle-class lifestyle. And that's great. That's a boundary you get to have. But your mom has done just fine for herself with this man who she wants to be married to. And I got to call you on this, Jill. See the humanity in people, even if they have no job or no car. They are real people. They have hearts. They have love. And apparently he's quite comforting to your mother. And he stood by her even though her kids have been so hard on him. That's a factor that has broken up many a marriage of people who try to put a life together for themselves after divorce. So I'm happy that she has a partner. I'm sad that he's dying. That's going to be hard for her. So fast forward to now, and they're still married, and now he's sick. Dementia and CPTOD. Oh, that's really hard. CPTOD, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a lung thing. It's very hard to get air, and it's terminal, and he's on oxygen. My mother still holds on to this fantasy of all of us being what I call the Brady Bunch family. I don't blame her. That's a good fantasy for everybody to have family harmony together, for you to love her and accept her husband. This is a joke you were saying. If the Lord Jesus came to earth and told your sister to be friends with her husband, she would not. That's how much the hatred is there. Hate is a terrible thing. And that's why I asked you the question about him. Did he do something wrong? And he didn't. My mom and I have always and still do have a special bond, yet I don't want to become her emotional bestie, handy woman, maid, chef, therapist, hairdresser, or have a fake friendship with her husband. It sounds like you're scared of getting codependent. You said in a little bit later that you're a carbon copy of her. So you're worried about being codependent and getting all enmeshed with her. Okay, good boundary. That's a good boundary to recognize that you need to have. That's your fear. You do the daily practice. So I have fear if I go live at home, I'm going to have to be all these things to her and be all enmeshed with her, and it'll drive me crazy. So there's another option here. You can be kind and loving and have a boundary and not become those things to her. But since you're 47, I'm guessing she's in her 70s, and she's got a husband who's dying and who's got dementia and COPD, and she could use some help. And I think help would, since you're using her to go live with her for help, it would be really appropriate and mature of you to reciprocate and give her help. And helping somebody doesn't have to be enmeshment. It can be a gesture of love and responsibility and duty. And it feels good to be that person. When you give somebody out of love, it feels good. When you give somebody out of trying to keep them from being mad at you, it feels bad. But I'm just hearing in here, I recognize this. I had a very angry relationship with my mom. She died when I was 30. But I had something like this with her. I was just mad at her. I liked my stepdad quite a lot. He's still in my life. But I was mad at her. She was the drinker. And I really, really regret treating her in an angry way during her final years while she had cancer. But it's all I had right then. So I'm just kind of like trying to talk to you as my younger self and say, get that daily practice going. So I got the daily practice like the very week she died, which wasn't a coincidence. I was just really effed up, emotionally. And I was shown a way to get free of all this stuff, and the anger and the sadness came pouring out and pouring out and pouring out. And so without having her alive to talk to, I was able to heal so much of my pain and resentment at my mom about stuff. And you get to do that while she's alive. And I'm just saying, like the situation you're telling me, it would be a great kindness to her to embrace the fact that this is the man she loves, and she's probably going through a lot of grief right now that he's dying and that he's, losing it. That's very sad. You've always had this great relationship. You don't want to get enmeshed. She's always had some jealousy tendencies that have irritated me for years, yet she denies them. If I have a new hairdo or a new dress and you recently lost 70 pounds, that's fabulous. That indicates a great deal of personal growth. I know losing weight takes focus and personal change, so good for you. That's a sign of health. She will say comments like, "Oh, I want that too," or can you help me lose weight? So I just got to say, I don't hear why you hear that as jealous. I hear that as admiration, and also, just like, gosh, I want to lose weight too. Like, don't you hear that from a lot of people? I know when I had significant weight loss, a lot of people said, "What plan did you use? I want to use that plan." And I took it as a compliment, not jealousy. I question that, whether it's really jealousy. I'm not there. But really, get your fears and resentment on paper about that. It doesn't sound like it from what you're describing. Okay. She also has rules for her home, very appropriate. I have rules for my home. And she has a bad habit of micromanaging. She also has expressed that she doesn't understand why the siblings can't see that she needs help around the house. So I guess she feels that you guys don't help her enough. And you say, I'm all for pitching in, but her demands, entitled mindset, and behaviors can trigger my own CPTSD symptoms to new heights. So I'm not hearing entitlement. And this is one of the other like really hard things that I have to say, but I want you to hear it. I think you thinking that you can live there and not help her to the degree that she would like you to help her, that's the entitlement. And I just want to like challenge you to see if you can kind of relax that idea that as an older person who's housing you, she actually is legitimately entitled to get some help around the house. It's true. That is it. And conversely, you're not actually entitled to live there or entitled to live there and be unkind to her husband. Okay? I'm just calling it. I hope you can hear this. Like, this might be making you really mad, and I'm just going to have to let that be. But I think this could be life-changing for you to really get this and get it onto the paper. Like, get to the daily practice calls. You know, maybe make an appointment with Kara, the coach on our team who can do one-on-ones with people doing the daily practice. That's on the coaching page of my website. But she can help you get to the heart of this resentment so you can like bust it open and like wash it off and be lighthearted and warm-hearted and open-hearted towards these very precious people in your life. You'll never have them again. So you said you don't want to have a fake friendship with her husband and you know nothing about him, not even his middle name. I'm going to give you an assignment if you're willing to accept it. Get to know him, talk to him. If his dementia isn't too far gone, sit down and ask him questions about himself. Spend an hour asking him questions, let him talk, and don't interrupt. Learn about him. Learn about this guy who loves your mom. You might find out something that opens your heart and gives you empathy for him and helps you see why your mom loves him so much. And I think it would mean a lot to your mom if you would take that time to get to know him. And I'm thinking, my husband and I we just had lunch with my stepdad, and I loved what my husband did. We were chatting away, and my husband was so interested in my stepdad's a really, really interesting person. And but because I was a kid with him, I think I don't see it as easily as my husband did. And my husband was asking him these questions, and the answers were, I was like, really? I didn't know that about you. And having his perspective helped me realize and feel a little bit embarrassed that I hadn't asked those questions myself, you know, about how he grew up and what happened, you know, in his youth. And they're, you know, great stories. But that's how, when we give our attention to other people, that's a way to show love. And often I notice that the older people get, and especially like you said, with the pandemic and retirement, there's been so much grave isolation, that it's a loving gift to anybody we encounter. If somebody seems to you to be lonely and need an ear to listen to, and you're just hanging out, like, do that for them. Do that for them. And use your daily practice to deal with the triggers that come up. Because the triggers that come up, it's a trigger. It's not even necessarily anything that needs to be done anything about. It's a trigger, and you just kind of like relax it by getting the fear and resentment on paper, ask for it to be removed. I'm so glad you have that. I'm so glad you have that, Jill. Okay. You say you're a carbon copy of your mom, minus the indecisiveness and micromanagement. Okay, so good. You probably have your own things, right? We all do. And you don't want to be made to feel guilty for living your life. And you talk about going out on weekends, talking on the phone after 9, or not wanting to cook for her husband, like they're one big happy family. Okay, the first two, talking on the phone after 9, not going out on weekends, sound like teenage things. And so if your mom is still doing that to you as an adult when you're there and you're kind and polite, I think you can set a very polite boundary and say, Mom, sorry, I need a little downtime of my own. But you have a 4-year-old kid. You have a 4-year-old kid, and so what I'm wondering, I didn't hear this, are you expecting them to babysit, and is that more than she can do right now? That's a piece that you missed right there. So I want to bring your attention to that maybe if you're going out on weekends, you might need to find another arrangement. I don't know, maybe they help you. If you're just saying, I don't want to be treated like a child, oh, this is going to sound mean, but you got to act like an adult. You have to be that loving, helpful person. And when a mother is in their 70s and a daughter is in their 40s, the roles are reversed now. You're the one who should be providing the extra care. That's just the natural order of things. So I think you'll find you have a lot more harmony when you show up with love. And I get it. Her boundaries are crap. The enmeshment is really uncomfortable. But you're in a special group of people now, of people who have tools for how to deal with that. So I encourage you to give it a try. Then you say, I don't want to cook for her husband like we're one big happy family. If you can't live there and cook for her husband, and you just want to be selective about that and cook for yourself or just for your mom, I don't think you should go there. I think that's so hostile and so unkind that you shouldn't go there. I think they're going through a lot right now with his illness. Your mom's lonely. It'd be nice if you could stay nearby, but I don't think you should bring that kind of stress in the house. I know if I were in your mother's shoes, that would be so upsetting. It would just break me. I couldn't do it. I'm sure she's in a lot of grief right now and pain, and I wouldn't do that to her. It's not fair. You said that she's very excited for you to come home. She's been very isolated. Sick husband, pandemic, etc. And you want to enjoy your time with her while you're there. However, you're just starting your own healing journey and have incorporated the daily practice. And I hear you. And I would say if they were fine and they could be expected for everything to just stay status quo for a long time, I would say, don't go there, go stay somewhere else. But the reason why I think you might want to just kind of buck up and use your daily practice twice a day and meditate and get a buddy and go to daily practice meetings and do all of that is so that you can show up and go be helpful and supportive of your mom at this hard time. And you would have the added benefit of saving some money as a single mom. I'm sure that's very valuable to you. And you might just grow much closer to your mom. It can be very healing to be close to heal from all those resentments. And you can actually get free of resentments and fears quite quickly if you have a mind to do it through the daily practice. So I'd really encourage you, dive in. If you go into the membership program with me, there's a Facebook group where there's peer-led daily practice calls all day long, 3 or 4 a day, all over the world at different times. You can join in. There's a lot of support for people who are doing just what you're doing. They're trying to heal their lives. They're trying to calm their triggers. There's a place for this, okay? So you were asking, how do I set healthy age-appropriate boundaries with her? As she's big on children being respectful and honoring to their parents. So she's setting a boundary with you. You need to be respectful and honor the parents. Can you do it? I would just say, if you cannot respect and honor and be kind to them, don't go. That's not fair. That's her boundary. And you know she's weak on boundaries, but those are her boundaries. Don't take advantage of her just because she doesn't kick you out for being unkind. Don't take advantage. I really encourage you, show up with love. Show up with love and forgiveness and an open heart, and just see if you can soften your heart towards them. See if you can soften up a little bit. It feels good. It feels good to just soften up and go, you know what, this is okay. And these people aren't going to be on earth very long. And it's a nice thing you're doing if you can go hang out and just show up with love and acceptance. Everybody wants to be accepted. Everybody wants to be seen and heard and loved and accepted just as they are, and so do you. And sometimes you can't get that from people in the way that you want, but you can give it to people. And it's always worth doing if you can, okay? If you can hold your own boundaries. So you say, I don't want to repeat of Christmas a few years back when she said she did so much for us. And I stepped in as I'm grateful, and you cleaned up, but she couldn't do that. I've done that. Yeah, it sounds like she got flustered and dysregulated, and she was resentful and hurt about who was cleaning up, and she felt taken advantage of. And you know what? I'm a mom of young adults, and I feel the same way sometimes. And there's probably been times I did the dishes. It's always me. I have to do everything. That's my lot in life. But when I'm on that mantra, I know I need to sit down and write. So I have tools. Your mom does not. Who knows? Maybe she'll pick it up from you. Maybe. Don't force it. I've never had luck forcing it on anybody. And then she continued to help out or micromanage by telling you how to sweep the floor. Yeah, it's how it is. Later that evening, I walked into her room with cake, and she didn't ask right out if she could have a piece. She said, "Ooh, I want some cake," in a childlike voice. So you say you got triggered, and it's yeah, that sounds like your trigger. It's just, in my scheme of things, that's not that big a deal. But I empathize with you because I know what it's like to be kind of fed up with a certain energy with somebody, and that's what it sounds like it is with you. It's it's a certain energy that you don't like, but you have no choice but to accept. You can't change her. You can leave, you can hang out. If you hang out, I encourage you just to accept. Just accept her as she is. See her, hear her, love her, accept her. It'll be so relaxing for her, and relaxed people who feel accepted are less likely to go into their passive-aggressive behavior. They might still do it, but there's the thing. That's the catch of people. It's like, we can't control them, okay? So the Father's Day thing, and she said that thing, you didn't say Happy Father's Day, and you said you had an emotional flashback. I can't imagine an emotional flashback about that, but I'm just trying to understand what that was. Is that it just sounds like there was tension between them, and she felt like she had to stand up for him, and it was awkward and weird. But you know what? If what they want is for you to say Happy Father's Day, say Happy Father's Day. Just give the love, give the kindness, help out where you can. It's nothing to say Happy Father's Day. I say it to my stepdad, and my kids say it to their stepdad, and their stepmom and I are celebrating our birthdays together soon. Like, love is good. It's good to have a loving extended family. It's a very positive thing. And if people are not abusive, you have a huge opportunity with you. So you said, please help me before I lose it. I hope this helps. This is one of the toughest love videos that I've made before, and I hope you feel the love in it. I identify with you. I want to save you a lot of the grief that I went through from being hard-hearted towards people in my life. I'm so grateful to have the people in my life, even the characters. It's good to have people to celebrate holidays with and to help each other in their time of need and just to be together. It's a very positive thing. So I send you my love, and I hope you find strength in doing this, and come see us in the daily practice call. I do them twice a month. They're free for anybody who's taken the daily practice course.